So let's look at our solve by factoring notes. What we're given here is a picture of a quadratic, sometimes also known as a parabola. It is a U-shaped curve here. So the quadratic for y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3 is graphed below. What are the x-intercepts of the quadratic? Where does this cross the x-axis?
Negative 0. 1, 2, 3, 0.
Negative 1, 0, and 3, 0. In fact, that is my way that I prefer to have the answer written as an ordered pair. But some people might have written down just negative 1, comma 3, which I'm also fine with as long as you do not put parentheses around there, because negative 1, 3 isn't an ordered pair. We cross the x-axis at negative 1, we cross the x-axis at 3. Those are the x-intercepts, which are also known as solutions or zeros. The reason that they're called zeros of a function is because the y value of the ordered pair is always 0. I also oftentimes call it a root. What we're going to learn today here is another way of solving a quadratic equation. And what it is, it's called the zero product law. I often call it the zero product property. And all that it says is if the product, if two factors are multiplied together, two or more factors are multiplied together, and set equal to 0, we take each of the factors and we set them equal to 0 and solve. So sometimes when you look at the definition there, I tried to paraphrase it. I want to show you, though, how it actually works. By the way, when we do set the factors equal to 0, at least one of the factors has to actually equal 0. Again, I think it shows up a little bit better when we look at our examples here. And the first two are already factored for us. It says solve each of the following equations for all values of x. Well, we have x plus 7 times the quantity of x minus 3 equals 0. What we do to use the zero product law is we take x plus 7, and we set it equal to 0, and x minus 3, and we set it equal to 0, and we solve. Now, there's some of you in this room who can look at that and tell me that the answer is x equals negative 7 and x equals 3. I am fine with that. I'm going to show the work, but if you don't need to show all of the work, I am okay with that. We can subtract 7 from both sides and get x equals negative 7. We can add 3 to both sides and get x equals 3. One thing that I will say, though, is if we actually are solving by factoring, you do need to show the factoring. But fortunately, on these first two problems, we're lucky enough that it's already in factored form for us. And once again, what the zero product property, zero product law says is we take each factor and we set it equal to 0. So we solve. We add 5 to both sides. We get 2x equals 5. And divide both sides by 2. And over here, we add 4 to both sides. And we get x equals 4. That at least illustrates the idea of the zero product property. Well, let's look back here at the quadratic from problem number 1. It says factor the quadratic, then use the zero product law to algebraically determine the zeros, the x-intercepts, the roots of the solution. And first and foremost, what you may want to do is you may want to put a 0 in for the y, because we do want to solve. And we have x squared minus 2x minus 3. Well, in this particular problem, we're going to split the middle. If that starts you thinking about the factoring again. And we take 1 times 3, which is 3. And the only factors of 3 are 1 and 3. Will they ever combine to equal 2, and hopefully yes. What are the signs? -3, +1. So as we fill this in, we have x squared plus 1x minus 3x minus 3. By the way, if you wrote minus 3x first and plus 1x second, that is fine. That will still work. We're going to group now. And our greatest common factor in our first group is the smallest exponent of the x's, which is a 1. 1x. We had 2 x's. We took out 1. We got 1. 1x divided by 1. Sorry, 1x divided by x is 1. We had 1x. We took it out. Be careful here because there's a minus in between, and that tends to trip some of you up. But the greatest common factor between 3x and 3 is 3. 3x, negative 3x divided by negative 3 is positive x. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is positive 1. And in general, what we get in that first parentheses, we better get in that second parentheses. And now, we have x plus 1 times x minus 3. And remember, originally we put equal 0 in there. Once again, some of you can tell me what the answers are. But if you can't, so now that we've factored the problem, let's take x plus 1 and set it equal to 0. X minus 3, set it equal to 0. This is where the zero product law comes into play. So we subtract 1 from both sides. We get x equals -1. We add 3 to both sides, and we get x equals 3. What we've seen so far is we've seen the picture of the quadratic, and now we've solved that quadratic by factoring as well. So there's a good check system for you. But most of the time here, for the remainder of our notes, let's practice our factoring. And there's one more thing that we have to keep in mind with this factoring. It's really important to make sure the quadratic that we're solving is equal to 0. We cannot use factoring unless the quadratic is set equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, move the terms over to the other side. And in general, try to make your x squared term positive. We can use all methods of factoring to solve quadratic equations. We have difference between two squares. We have greatest common factor. We have split the middle. We have grouping. We've got cubes. We have all different types of factoring. So what we need to remember as we go through our final examples here is which method do we need to use? And as we take a look at this first problem, solving each of the following quadratic equations, leave answers in simplest fraction form if necessary. Well, right here at the start, we do not have an equation that's set equal to 0. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set it equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 24x from both sides. And now we have 8x squared minus 24x equals 0. And what we should always ask ourselves when we're factoring is, do we have a greatest common factor? As we glance at this, we do have a greatest common factor, and in fact, that is the method that we're working with on this problem. And our greatest common factor for our numbers is 8. 8 will go into both 8 and 24. Between x squared and x, we're going to take the smallest exponent, which is x. 8 divided by 8 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. We had 2 x's, we took out 1. 24 divided by 8 is 3. We had 1x, but we took it out. And now that we have the equation set equal to 0, and we have it factored, we can solve. 8x equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. And when we solve, if I can, divide both sides by 8. And we end up with x equals 0. Add 3 to both sides. And x equals 3. Remember what this means. This means if we were to graph this equation, our x-intercepts would be 0 and 3. In terms of order pairs, they'd be 0, 0 and 3, 0. Letter B. And in order to solve this problem, the equation has to be set equal to 0. So that's where we have to start. We're going to add 7 to both sides. Now it's set equal to 0. Any thoughts on what method we might use? Lily? Let's split the middle. And we split the middle on the front page, but this one's a little bit more challenging because there's a number in front of the x squared. We're going to take 4 times 7. The number in front of the x squared term times the constant. 4 times 7 is 28. And let's look at the factors. 1 and 28. 2 times 14. 4 times 7. Will any of those combine to be 16? And if you're taking a close look here, the 2 and the 14 will combine. In fact, it's plus 2 and plus 14. So when we put that back in, write down the 4x squared, write down the 7, and then we'll fill in our middle split. Plus 2x plus 14x. Now we're going to group. Here and here. Greatest common factor. The greatest common factor in the first group is 2x. 4x squared divided by 2x is 2x. In terms of the x's, we had 2 x's, we took out 1, we still have 1. 2x divided by 2x is 1, and yes, we need to write the 1. We had 1x, we took it out. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Not so difficult here in terms of the sign there because it's a plus this time. But between 14 and 7, the greatest common factor is 7. That's the biggest number that goes into both. 14x divided by 7 is 2x. 7 divided by 7 is 1. And now what we see is that that parentheses that we just got in our second group matches the parentheses that we got in our first group. And now we're close to finishing. We have 2x plus 1 times 2x plus 7 equals 0. And the zero product property says, set each factor equal to 0. 2x plus 1 equals 0. 2x plus 7 equals 0. Subtract 1 from both sides. You get 2x equals negative 1. Divide both sides by 2. So x equals negative 1/2. And over here, subtract 7 from both sides. You get 2x equals negative 7. Divide both sides by 2. You get x equals negative 7/2. Again, hopefully this factoring is a review. We haven't been in school for a few days, so we tend to forget when we get away from this. And hopefully it's coming back to you. We've got a bunch of different methods for solving. Letter C, 16x squared minus 25 equals 0. What method here? Difference of squares. And what we do with the difference of squares is we're going to take the square root of 16x squared. We're going to take the square root of 25. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of 25 is 5. Difference between two squares, different signs. Nice part here is that the equation was already set equal to 0. We didn't have to move anything. And now we can apply the zero product property, which says we're going to take 4x minus 5 and set it equal to 0. And 4x plus 5 and set it equal to 0. The nice thing is for some of you, you might have to do the work here. When we add 5 to both sides, we get 4x equals 5. And divide both sides by 4. So we get x equals 5/4. But the only thing that's different in these parentheses is a sign. So if we ended up with positive 5/4 in the first parentheses, we should end up with negative 5/4 in the second parentheses. But if you need to see the work as well, subtract 5 from both sides. We get 4x equals negative 5. Divide both sides by 4. And sure enough, we get negative 5/4. As we finish, and some of you are probably already finished, as we take a look at this one, what method of factoring is it? It's grouping. And one of the ways that we know that this is grouping, or a strong hint for us, is that there are 4 terms. X cubed is a term, 5x squared is a term, 4x is a term, 20 is a term. So we've got the grouping here. Nice thing is that the equation's already set equal to 0. Here's a group, here's a group. When we're grouping here with the exponents, like we have a 3 and a 2, we take the smallest exponent for our greatest common factor. We had 3 x's, we took out 2, we've got 1 left. That's x cubed divided by x squared. We had 2 x's, we took them out. 5x squared divided by x squared is just 5. Watch out here because there's a negative in between, and that sign tends to mess people up when it's a negative. But our greatest common factor between 4x and 20 is 4. Negative 4x divided by negative 4 is x. Positive 20 divided by negative 4 is negative 5. And what we see is x minus 5, x minus 5. In both groups. Then we're left with the x squared and the 4. But as we take a little closer look at this problem here, we might be thinking, wait a minute, I think we can factor a little bit more. Because we have x squared minus 4, which we just did on that last problem, is a difference between two squares. We get x minus 5. And now we're going to factor that x squared minus 4. And once again, when we're dealing with difference between two squares, square root of x squared is x. Square root of 4. Difference between two squares, different signs. And this time we have 3 factors, but we can still use the zero product law. By the way, I hope that there's some people out here in this room who can say, oh, Ms. Danhoff, x equals 5, x equals 2, x equals negative 2. If you can, that's fine. For those of you who can't, here's where it's coming from. We're taking each factor and we're setting it equal to 0. So we add 5 to both sides. and we get x equals 5. We add 2 to both sides, and we get x equals 2. We subtract 2 from both sides, and we get x equals -2.